We have a saying in our emotional resilience class that if you can name it, you can tame it. And that's why we're doing this series. We want to demystify anxiety. I know what it's like to be anxious. I spent a lot of my teenage years and then into my 20s and even up into my 30s with severe anxiety. Now, I was functional, but boy, at night, it would get me. I would have these different kinds of issues with anxiety, and so I know what it's like to feel anxious. Now, back then, the options were the subconscious mind, or in my case, as a minister, we talked about the demonic. Well, thank God for Neil Anderson, who wrote all about the demonic, and I was able to use the armor of God and other things that he taught to help me with that. But I never could figure out the subconscious mind. I used to pray, Lord, help me with my subconscious mind, But today, because of the decade of the brain in the 90s and what we've learned so much in this century, we know that the brain has a lot to do with our anxiety. And if we can use our mind, we can retrain our brain. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, the brain is incredible. It's incredible. It has over 86 billion neurons. Now, when I first started studying this, I started writing my class about almost 18 years ago. They were talking about 100 billion, but apparently someone recounted them. So conservatively speaking, 86, but each one of those neurons have these dendrites and these other synapses, right? 10,000. So now you just start doing the multiplication and you have trillions, hundreds of trillions of connections, which then create just a multitude of different kinds of neuronal firing, and we call these connectomes. And so the brain is able to morph from one to another to another. It's the most incredible thing in the universe, I believe. Our brain is incredible. In fact, in Psalms 139, the psalmist says, "Thanks for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous." Another translation says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And we are. And we have this wonderful brain that we can use to help us with our anxiety. The brain is the command center, if you will, of the human nervous system. This human nervous system is, connected with our brain and our brain stem. It has the going down the spine. It connects to every part of our body. You have the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. All these together make this complex, wonderful nervous system that we have. It regulates our body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, and a lot of times without us even being conscious of it. It receives a flood of sensory information and filters it out to what's important. If we were able to be conscious of everything that our brain is, and it became conscious, we'd be overloaded. But the brain is able to filter those things out and use it for us. And so it's in a tremendous, tremendous brain that we have. We're not going to go into much detail about the brain right now, but if you're interested, I'd encourage you to study it. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And in my classes on emotional resilience, I take 8 courses or 8 sessions, if you will, to talk about the brain. I encourage you to go ahead. In fact, in the book, in the front of the book that you have in the PDF, if you go ahead and scan the QR code or go to the website that I give you there, you'll have, each section will have videos related to it, and it will take you right to the videos that I have on the brain so you can learn more. Now, what I thought was one of the most interesting things is that the brain has 2 hemispheres. And these hemispheres communicate, but a lot of times they work on their own too, and both are important to our emotions. We've emphasized the left brain forever. The left brain is where our analytical thought, our logic, our intellectual part of our brain, the language, scientific skills, reading, writing, mathematics, logic, lists, all that comes through that left brain. And of course, our schools have centered around reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? We've always emphasized the left hemisphere of the brain, maybe without even knowing it. It recognizes words, letters, numbers. But what we know today is that there's another part, another hemisphere of our brain that interacts, that works in combination with it, and it notices other things. It's intuitive. Of course, we've always known the right brain is more creative and musical, but it's also where we have our emotional expression, and we use our imagination. Sensory impressions from our senses come through that right hemisphere. We have recognized faces, places, objects, sounds, the sensory input. We recognize all that, and it's the emotional center as well. And so we see that the emotions, and when we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about emotions, the right hemisphere plays an important part. And today we know more about how that works and how if we can name it, we can tame it. When we look closer at the brain, we see that there's at least 3 parts that are important to our emotional regulation. Now, when we're talking about the brain, it not only has 2 hemispheres, there's also 3 parts of the brain that are really important to our emotional regulation and anxiety. Now, we know that the brain works more holistically, but still it helps to know some of these parts where we can at least kind of figure out what's going on. And the 3 parts, you have the thinking brain. And if you will, Dan Siegel has a hand model where he takes his hand like this, and he takes his thumb, puts it inside, wraps the fingers around it. Now, I know there's a similarity a little bit between my head and the hand. I should probably get some glasses and maybe a little goatee there, but this is the brain, right? And so what we have is this front part, this whole area here is the cortex, but we're primarily interested in the prefrontal cortex, specifically the right prefrontal cortex, right behind the eyes. That's the command center of the brain. That's the intellectual, if you will. That's where the rational data comes into it, and we think more rationally. Now, if you open up the brain, if you drill the hole this way and this way, right in the center is the limbic area, and that's the emotional center of the brain. And there's different parts in there. The ones that we care the most about is the amygdala. The amygdala is the guard shack. Now, it works with the others, and I'll go more into that in a minute. But it's the one that takes in sensory information and decides if it's dangerous. It will send it on to the prefrontal cortex, but that takes a couple milliseconds later. If it's that important, it will flip the lid, if you will, and it will run everything. It will hijack the brain. And what we need to do, what we're going to learn to do here is regulate our emotions, bring what? Bring that prefrontal cortex back online. And bring the thinking brain, because we can't think emotionally and rationally at the same time. Now, thank God that we have anxiety. You don't want to do without anxiety. If you have a test coming up, you should be a little anxious if you're not preparing. But what happens is sometimes it gets oversensitized, and it starts going off and predicting danger when there really isn't any danger. For example, I was afraid of the basement, the monster in the basement. There wasn't a monster, but you couldn't tell me that. I remember my dad took me down there once, took me by the hand, see, son, there's no monster. And I remember thinking, yeah, they're not going to come out when you're there, you know. But what happened, though, is that I had this perception, my brain perceived that there was danger. It learned it somewhere through association. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. We have a learning brain that learns through associations. And so we have the thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex. We have that emotional part of the brain, and it goes by what it feels, right? What comes through the senses. And then we have the brain stem, right? The instinctual and the action. The action goes down through into our body, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze. So we have that prefrontal cortex, right, that part, and that's where we get assumptions, it's where we make assumptions, that's where we predict. The brain's a predicting machine. And we need to make sure that the input is accurate, or else we're going to be acting with inaccurate information. And so the prefrontal cortex, develops relationships with others, and those relationships are what causes us then to make assumptions about life and about people. And so the prefrontal cortex is important, and we need to use it. The limbic area now, that center part, that has different parts. The four main parts that we'll talk about here is the thalamus. The thalamus takes all the sensory information from the body and sends it to the amygdala, which is the guard shack, and then to the prefrontal cortex and other parts that need it. The amygdala then is the guard shack, and it's a central alarm system, and it has its own memory. It's different than our biographical memory. It's more, it memorizes the sensations, the look on the face, the sounds, the things that were perceived as dangerous, the clues, if you will, the triggers, it memorizes that. So later on, when it sees a trigger, it alarms us. It's a central alarm. If it feels it's imminent, it will take over. Like I said earlier, thankfully we have emotions. But what happens is, if you're walking and not paying attention, you're walking to the street and a truck comes down, thank the Lord, your ears will hear it, sends a message, and you step back. Why? Because the amygdala said, danger. But what happens if that truck's, 200 yards down and you won't cross the street because you feel it's dangerous? That's an overactivation of the amygdala. It's oversensitized. That's the brain has the wrong trigger there. It's oversensitized, and that's where we're going to relearn a lot of things and how we're going to change a lot of our anxiety. The hypothalamus, now it's what controls the autonomic nervous system. It gets us to move. So when it comes through, if it's dangerous, boom, it goes down through there. And the hippocampus is an important part. That's what takes our short-term memory, puts it into long-term memory. And it works with the prefrontal cortex to check our assumptions a lot of times. And so we can use it for reflection, we can use it for correction on a lot of the things that we're doing. And we'll use that a lot to help us recorrect and relearn what the truth is about what we should be anxious about. Now, when we talk about an oversensitized limbic system or amygdala, it's key to being over-anxious. Annie Hopper coined the phrase limbic impairment, and she says this: in healthy individuals, the limbic system serves as a protective gate to analyze and filter incoming stimuli and aligns a level of threat importance. Now, when damaged, however, or when oversensitized, this filtering process can become impaired and alter the way the brain and the body interpret, encode, and respond to any sensory or emotional stimuli. The resulting cross-wiring or disorganization of neural circuits establishes involuntary trauma patterns that overactivate threats and protective and survival mechanisms. And so many times, we are overreacting. The monster in the basement, right? I was overreacting, oversensitized. And so we need to retrain that part of the brain. Now, this is key. It's about safety and association. I'll be repeating this over and over again because it's key. We walk around all the time feeling unsafe. When I was in my hypervigilance, it was like there was a predator in the room. I was on guard all the time, wondering what was going to happen, who was going to judge me, was I going to be seen as inadequate? Did I do something wrong? This hypervigilance, this people-pleasing part of myself was oversensitized. And it was about safety. I felt unsafe. But was I unsafe? Probably not. But my brain felt so. And that's what I had to start retraining. You see, it's about association. Dr. Dan Siegel, who did the hand model of the brain, and he's written many books, but he said that as children, we were meant to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And when it comes to living our life, if we weren't those things, then that puts us on edge. That causes us to be hypervigilant. If in our childhood we weren't seen as important, we didn't belong, we weren't safe, we weren't soothed, when our parents are supposed to be our emotional regulators. If they didn't teach us how to regulate our emotions, then we were constantly going around needing to be soothed. And we weren't secure. We weren't secure. So that causes us to overreact. And we make these assumptions and we start to build on those. Take the baseball player. He's in a slump. He's not doing very good. This one time he comes up to bat and 1, 2, 3, taps his bat, gets up there and bam, he hits a home run. What do you think he's going to do the next time he comes up to bat? It's going to go 1, 2, 3. And if he hits another home run, he'll never stop doing that, right? Associations are powerful. The guy that's in the casino, and I don't recommend gambling at all. I think it's the worst of all the addictions. And but if he was pulling the lever, right, and all of a sudden, he's putting in quarters, and he gets a little bit, so he keeps going. He puts in another quarter, but this time he goes like this, wipes his head, comes back, ching, 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 ching. What do you think he's going to do the next time? Right, he's going to do this. And it's going to take a good 8, maybe 10 times before he quits doing that, of not winning the money. If he wins again, he'll look like me by the time he's done, right? And so associations are powerful, but it doesn't mean they're accurate. It doesn't mean they're real. And that's the problem we have to overcome. We have to find out what these are and retrain the brain. That's why safety is important. When we have a trigger and we think that we're unsafe, we need to retrain ourselves by being safe at the same time, feeling safe, feeling something different, squashing down that anxiety and feeling safe. And we'll get into more of that when we talk about the regulation. Right now, we're heading into the let's recognize what's going on, and then we can start to learn to regulate it. We've talked about the prefrontal cortex. We've talked about the limbic area. The last part was the brainstem, and that's our life control center. It's a part that monitors and controls the body's vital functions, our heart rate, our breathing, body temperature. It focuses on our survival. And much of what occurs in that brainstem is subconscious and instinctual. Anger, fear, aggression, self-protection, thirst, all that kind of stuff, hunger, and that is taken through that part of the brain, and it's instinctual. We have to do it. And so when we train our limbic area, and that something's dangerous, it's going to work with our brainstem, and so we have to retrain the brain so we can get off that high alert and quit sending signals down through the body. That's what I did when I was hypervigilant. My whole body was like it was a hum going on, and that pumps cortisol through the body. I mean, it's not healthy. That's where we get all these psychosomatic issues, because we're constantly on guard.